So when you're widening your last to the appropriate width, the first thing you need to do is obviously to measure the correct width. So you want to measure across the widest point of your foot, which you can easily feel because bones stick out either side, as you can see here. It will be a slight diagonal measurement. And then you want to compare the width of the last. Again, obviously because the last is the shape of a shoe, not a foot, it's not going to be identical, but again, if you put the tape measure on the same kind of diagonal slant as you did when measuring the width of your feet, and just put the tape measure again, so across the widest point, and compare them. If the measurement is quite similar, then you don't need to worry. Certainly if it's within a couple of millimeters. Ideally you want the last to be a few millimeters smaller than the actual width of your foot, because the materials that you're going to use are stretchy, and you do want the shoe to stay on. But if you find that there is a big difference, your foot's 10 to 20 millimeters wider than the width of the last, then your shoes aren't going to be very comfy. So that's when we need to widen the last. You could use all sorts of different materials for this. You can use scraps of leather, card, anything really that, preferably something that you can skive down. And you want something of a reasonable thickness if you're going to be adding quite a bit of width to the last, because otherwise you'll be there a long time. So I use this corkboard. It's not too difficult to get hold of, and I find this works really well. Now the important thing when customising your lasts is you want to try and, as much as possible, maintain the overall shape of the last. Otherwise you will end up with some really weirdly shaped shoes. Always remember that you're going to be stretching material over the last, and it's going to be stretched, quite tightly. So the material is going to take on the shape of the last. So if you make it an odd shape, your shoes are going to be an odd shape, basically. So the simplest way to do this is to simply cut out some strips of, you can see I'm using the corkboard here, and you want to use a nice strong glue. So I use this Rainier glue, which is what we use to stick the soles on the shoes. You could use any kind of super glue, just because obviously you're gluing onto plastic, so a lot of glues won't enjoy sticking it very much. And then all we do is, this glue is a contact adhesive, so I have to put it on both parts, so both of the sides that you're sticking together. So you can see I'm painting it onto the corkboard and also onto the last. And you give it a little bit of time to dry. Technically you're supposed to give it quite some time to dry, but I find actually a couple of minutes is fine. And then you just bring the pieces together. Now, if you're doing flat shoes, this is going to be a little bit easier. You can see I'm doing a pair of heels here, and that makes a rather awkward shape where it goes into the vamp of the shoe. So as I say, important in all of this to maintain the original shape of the shoe. So one thing you need to make sure is that you're maintaining the feather edge, which is the bottom part of the shoe that you can see here. If you're cutting out rectangular strips, obviously, and because shoes are not symmetrical, they're not the same on either side, so you'll often find it works better on one side than the other. So try and get it as much along the edge as possible. Don't worry if you have some gaps. You'll probably have a gap at least on one side, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. Now, in order to try and smooth these out, what you then need to do is, so I use this little skiving tool. It's called a safety beveler, and it's rather like a potato peeler. And I find this is very good for filing down the edges, but you could also use a craft knife for this. And all you want to do is just take the harsh edges off the you know, all around the edges of the strips. So so yeah, it's quite hard to demonstrate this because I was having to put the shoe at a rather funny angle so you could see it on the camera. So it was quite hard to describe it at this angle, I discovered. But hopefully you can get the idea. So depending on how wide you want to make your shoes, you might get away with just one piece of corkboard. But if you need to widen them out a bit more, then obviously you can just cut a smaller piece and stick that on top as shown. You can see obviously if you stuck a piece on, it's going to have a very hard edge all the way around. Depending on how thick you need to build up your last, obviously you may need to stick more and more pieces. So what I do is put them up like a little pyramid, and then what you want to do is you want to smooth them out. So instead of a step pyramid, you're going to have a sort of straight-sided pyramid. As I say, you can do this with the safety beveler. You can also do it with a craft knife. So you can see in this demonstration the difference. I've sort of done half of this one and it's all smoothed out, and the other half not. So you can see what you're aiming for. As I say, we do want to make sure that the feather edge is perfectly preserved. So if you've got a bit of the corkboard is sticking out over the edge, then just take a craft knife and cut it off. Make sure it's really flush with it. If you have gaps where you can see here, because the shoe does not conform to a rectangular shape, there's a bit of a gap there. And what I do there is I just take some of the scraps of corkboard that I've got from cutting out things with it, and just cut out some nice little triangular pieces and just stick them in the gaps, just to fill it up. Obviously you can keep stopping and you measuring this as you go along, see if you've got it to the right width. Remember, you do want it to be a few millimeters less than your actual width of your foot. It says on it, it bonds everything, including its own lid. Which is why I tell everyone to be super careful, don't get any of it on the outside. It's quite difficult to police that when you're running workshops, but ideally you do want to make the two shoes sort of symmetrical. So unless, you know, you've got one foot massively wider than the other one, I wouldn't try and make them different particularly. But I do have to do this. Oh, would you let go? strand of this glue is just stuck to me and I can't get it off. Right, thank you. It's probably... do you think that will probably alright? I just want to stick something in there. Just a little shape here. And then the final thing you want to do, once it's all skived down and you're reasonably happy with it, it should have a nice smooth finish. It's quite hard to show on the camera here, but hopefully you can see. And then what you want to do is you want to take some glue. I just use ordinary PVA craft glue for this, and just coat over the cork board. And the reason for doing this is just because when you make a pattern, you're going to be covering the last in masking tape. And the cork board, probably notice, is quite crumbly, so I just coat it over in PVA glue just so that it's a nice smooth finish, so that when you take the masking tape, you're going to rip it off afterwards to make the pattern, and it's not going to take all the cork board off with it. The other thing you can do with PVA glue is if you've got some little gaps where the bits of cork board are joined on and, you know, it's maybe not as smooth as you would like it, I sometimes cheat a little bit. You can kind of see I've done it here, and just pour a bit of extra glue in those bits, so it all kind of helps to smooth it out.